When we're operating in a multi-access network, now, just quick definition, a multi-access network is a network where you will have multiple devices connected to the same link. So very often this is going to be Ethernet. So imagine this scenario here. I have 4 OSPF enabled routers. They're all connected to the same Ethernet network. This becomes a multi-access network. Okay. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about multi-access networks. When that happens, what we'll do is we will elect a designated router and a backup designated router. And we do that to limit the number of adjacencies we create. And to make it easier, we send out less LSAs, and it makes it easier to synchronize the link state databases across all routers. So what'll happen is the 2 other routers, so we'll have a designated router, a backup designated router, and the others are going to be called DR others. So these are going to synchronize with the designated router and the backup designated router, but not with each other. And so that cuts down the number of LSAs we have. So why do we need a designated router? To cut down on these required adjacencies and the propagation of LSAs across the network. Now, there's this fun little formula here, n times n minus 1 divided by 2. This is a number of adjacencies that will need to be created in order for the network to run without a designated router. So if I've got 4 routers here, then it would be 4 times 4 minus 1. So 4 times 3 divided by 2. 4 times 3 is 12 divided by 2 is 6. We would have to have 6 adjacencies in order for this to fully operate without a designated router. With the designated router and the backup designated router, that shrinks. These guys only establish full relationships with the designated router and the backup designated router. So how does that help? Well, we talked about this a second ago. With a designated router, the other routers only synchronize with the DR and the BDR instead of all the other routers. So that cuts down on your traffic quite a bit. Now, the other big question, so all of this kind of happens automatically when we're on that multi-access network. And we don't tell OSPF, hey, you're on a multi-access network. OSPF just kind of figures that out, right? It knows it's on a multi-access network because it knows what type of network it's connected to. And so then it will select a designated router and a backup designated router. All right. Can we manipulate that? Because that sounds like something we'd want to be able to do, right? If I've got, 4, 5, 6 routers, I'm probably going to want to choose which one is going to be my DR and my BDR, because I want those to probably be some of my bigger, more powerful routers. That's going to be super important. So there is a way that we can manipulate it, and that is the designated router and the backup designated router are chosen by their interface priorities. So every interface on this multi-access network, and this is interface, not router. So this interface, this interface, this interface, this interface are all going to have a priority of 1. That's just the default priority. So if they all have the same priority, and that's the number one thing we look at when we're determining the DR and the BDR, if they all have the same priority, then it comes down to router ID. And that's probably not the way we want to do this. So instead, what we can do is we can set the priority. And what happens, you'll see it here. You'll go into the interface. So in the interface itself, this is not in your OSPF configuration. This is in the interface configuration. So interface G00, and you'll issue the command IP OSPF priority, and then you're going to give it a number of 0 through 255. And the higher the number, the more likely it is to become the designated router. So the router with the highest priority becomes the DR. The router with the second highest priority becomes the BDR. And then you can set multiple priorities down below that in case, you have routers fail on a regular basis, which hopefully is not the case. So that's how we can manipulate that election and choose which devices we want to be our designated router and our backup designated router. And probably, this may not always be the case, but probably you're going to want that to be your newest, most powerful routers because they're going to have a little extra work to do that some of the others won't. Okay, there we go. That's how we elect and why we elect a designated router and a backup designated router on an OSPF multi-access network.